Without further ado, now I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Professor Paulo Ferrao, to present the city's mission and its challenges. So,
thank you very much, Aura. Can I try to share my slides?
absolutely, please.
Good. So, I guess it's working well.
Yes, perfect.
Good. Oh, first of all, I would, of course, thank you very much for having me here. It is very clear that C-NEWTRAL is particularly important for the context of the mission because, well, as, for example, just as Professor Ellis mentioned, so we are entering in a new territory. And also, as Professor Gaspari mentioned, this is very, very much interdisciplinary, and it makes things a little bit difficult. So we need new tools, we need to break the silos, and indeed, this brings me to my presentation. So I will divide the presentation in two. So in the first part, I will discuss what is the mission, what are the challenges, and eventually in the second part, I would discuss a little bit the research agenda that, for example, we are taking in our research center in Lisbon, which has to do with the cities, and then eventually we could have a good discussion about this. So first of all, I guess that you are aware about the missions, but let me say something about that. When the missions were created, they were created by politicians in Brussels with the idea, with the aim to engage the citizen. So it cannot be more coherent with your activities. So the idea was that citizens felt a little bit away of the Brussels, of the government. And then there was this idea, like Kennedy said, well, let's put a man on the moon. So here the missions were designed to be understood by the citizen and that the citizens could be engaged. And then, as you may know, so the Commission defined 5 missions. So climate neutral smart cities was one, but then the mission selected what they call a high-level group across Europe, which was 15 people, to design the mission. And this is the mission board. So that's what I am doing. So the mission board is the body that, well, provides support to the European Commission. And from 2021 to 2024, it contributed to design the mission. And then now we are contributing to support the cities and to support the developing process. And I will go a little bit into that in more detail. But I would like to tell you something which is not written here. In fact, the mission board, when we designed the mission, we created the title, which was, well, let's try to have 100 cities which are climate neutral, smart and climate neutral, but by the citizen and to the citizen. And that's, I think, aligns very well with your program. So I think what you are doing is really, really very important. So the mission. So the mission, as I said, was launched in 2021, and the idea of the mission was to invite cities, so with an application launched by the European Commission, to have cities supported by the European Commission to become climate neutral, not by 2050, when we should all be climate neutral, but by 2030, I think, as Aura have just mentioned, to be in fact the lighthouses of the cities in Europe. I always say this, we need to say that we were a little bit nervous that no city applied. So, because it's really a big challenge, but in fact, 377 cities applied. So, and then the Commission picked 100 plus 12 cities from associated countries. So we had 112 cities associated to the program, and our goal was to have 100 cities with a label. So we are, of course, in this moment, very happy because I would like to share with you, at the moment, we have already 103 cities with the label so far. So, and this is really fantastic. So we have achieved the goal of having 100. So we have 103 cities with the label so far. What does it mean to have the label? So, as you may know, the central piece that we have produced in our design of the mission was to have the cities producing a climate city contract. What is a climate city contract? It is a document with three components. So the first component is the commitments. So the mayor should really say, well, look, we really want to do this. And not only that, but normally the cities will have to demonstrate that they have already done a lot of different things in the past that comes into this direction. And then the cities need to define an action plan with a lot of actions that were then quantified in terms of their contribution to the abatement of the CO2 emissions. And what is even more difficult and eventually more new is cities need to develop an investment plan. And indeed, nowadays, this is the most important thing that the cities are doing is really to put the mission on the floor. We need the money, so we need to invest, and we need to invest large sums. So, and then a mission produces this document. It is submitted to the commission. The GRC makes an evaluation of that. Sometimes they provide some feedback to the city, so to improve this or that. But when it has enough quality, so the city is awarded the label of mission city. I would certainly like to invite you to download some of these CCCs from different cities so that you can really appreciate the type of development that is done in these CCCs. I just brought here data from these CCCs, which is not from all of them, but from some of the CCCs. And basically what I tried to do was to say, look, in the different cities, so which is the range of emissions? And you see the range is extraordinary. So you have cities that overall announce emissions of about 1 ton of CO2 per capita to about 8 tons of CO2 per capita. So we need to be very mindful that when we speak about cities are very diverse. So one solution will not fit all, and the cities are very different. And even, for example, if you look which are the main sources of emissions, well, industrial processes, it depends if it's an industrial city or not. So, and then you see here in blue, it's most of the cities will be in this area. So from 0 to 1 ton of CO2 per capita. Transport, for sure, from 1 to 2 tons of CO2 per capita. Buildings vary a lot, particularly because of climate, but it's one of the major emissions. And then you have waste and some electricity production, which would be, in fact, in other reflected in, for example, buildings and so on. So there are very few that refer electricity. So indeed, the areas that you have just mentioned of focus of your concern at C-NEWTRAL, they are very, very much, of course, aligned with these ideas. Now, why is the mission challenging? I think it is very challenging because of this slide. When we say a city, what is a city? The city is all of us. So normally in the investment plan to have the city becoming climate neutral, what you see is that the municipality normally will have 5 or 6% of the investment. You are speaking about municipal infrastructures, transportation, waste collection, but 30 to 50%, it's the citizens, it's all of us. So are we, for example, improving our building, changing our windows, for example, electrifying our car? Well, and then others like industries from 40 to 90. So this is the big question. And in your research studies, it will be very important if you see how this can be done. This requires new business models for which the citizen see benefit on his engagement. And certainly, I'm very excited with your work, and I think you could certainly deliver in this area. This is of enormous importance because this represents more than half of the investments that need to be done in a city. Now, we have in the mission, in the CCCs of the cities, they present their actions in 5 domains. So one is certainly the decarbonization of the energy sector. The other is the decarbonization of the transport and mobility sector. decarbonization of the building stock, moving from a linear to a circular economy model, and then compensated for residual emissions. So that's where the cities are presenting their actions in the CCCs. If we look at what they are presenting, well, the decarbonization of the energy sector is very important, but of course, do not forget that the city's mission is an exercise of multi-level governance. And this is another challenge. So we have the local governments, we have the national governments, and we have the European government, say, and of course, sometimes the ability, so the difficulty, but also the merit is to try to coordinate these different levels. For example, it is very rarely on the end of the city to make sure that the national electricity generation is 100% renewable. But this needs to be happening. So again, the coordination between the local level and the national level. And then at the city level, certainly the electrification of consumption, diversification of energy sources. So to improve energy efficiency, here city planners, city officials have something to do. And then eventually decarbonizing district heating and cooling networks. So these are some of the projects that the cities are proposing. If we look into the transport and mobility sector, so for sure, all of them, a central piece is to reduce private individual transport, use of public transport, active mobility, shared use of private individual means of transportation, electrification of transport and the use of sustainable fuels, and then emission-free urban logistics. So these are some projects that the cities are presenting here. If we look at the building stock, so we need to have a massive building renovation and refurbishment. So just to give you two numbers, it is normally accepted that today the rate of refurbishment of the buildings that need to be refurbished is 1% per year. So this means that 1% of the buildings are being refurbished every year. Some calculations show that in order to get to the objective of having the cities climate neutral, we need to improve this from 1 to 3%. So we need to triple the effort of renovating our buildings, and this is huge. It's huge in terms of jobs, it's huge in terms of skills, but of course it creates a lot of opportunities. Because there is another thing which is particularly critical, is that people need to see the benefit of this. So they need to see that this creates jobs, they need to see that this is good for their health, and eventually more and more we need to look at these issues not just as climate change, because people eventually are less aware, less concerned, but there are a lot of co-benefits that came out of this, and we should be able to articulate this. And this is another dimension for academicians, for PhD students, and that's an area where for sure we can contribute. And then we have the fight of energy poverty, electrification of residential and service consumption, and then local harvesting of renewable energy. Well, for example, in every house, every roof can certainly be the location for a solar panel. So if we speak about the circular economy, yeah, so we need to improve the treatment of waste, reduce waste production, and reuse and upcycle materials. And the cities are proposing some projects in these areas. And then, of course, we will not come to zero emissions. So some emissions that are still residual at the end need to be offsetted. So we need to develop and consolidate the infrastructure. We need to have solutions for carbon capture. For example, like having electricity produced out of, for example, waste, municipal waste, and then capturing the CO2 that is released. So that's what we call negative emissions. So this is also possible. Now, which are the main barriers? Well, financing, for sure. So that is a main barrier. So as I mentioned before, the multi-level governance. So we need to articulate different levels of government, because only at the local level we cannot solve everything. Of course, the municipal sphere of influence, the power to act of them is very limited. So as I said before, Most of the actions need to be done by the citizen, by all of us, and that's why I was so interested in your focus on citizen engagement. This is extremely important, and as I'm sure you know, maybe the most difficult thing. So you are really in a very challenging topic. Of course, there might be cultural barriers, and I'm not going to go through these, but only to the ones that I have highlighted. You need capacitation, education, and awareness. So that's very important. You need a skilled labor force. For example, just to give you an example, when we speak about building rehabilitation, there is a great opportunity to promote the industrialization of building rehabilitation because we don't have labor enough to triple the, the effort in rehabilitation of buildings if we don't accompany that with an industrialization of the process. And this is a great opportunity for local industries, for innovation, and really to create new jobs. Well, opportunities are at the same order of magnitude. So we need innovative policy instruments, local green jobs, smart and flexible electricity grids. There is a lot of room for demand side management of electricity, battery storage, and then what I think is very important. So that's what, for example, I'm doing here today at MIT is to work on digital twins. So it is very important because if we have a concern on multidisciplinarity, if we have a concern on renewable energies, the big difference is that models need to have spatial and time resolution. So we need to have much higher degree of granularity. Just to tell you, eventually the last thing about the mission. So the mission in Brussels is supported by Net Zero Cities. So they have created this big effort with, well, a significant human capacity that then delivers support to the cities. And recently they have developed a new capacity under the Net Zero Cities, which is the Capital Hub, which is a group of experts that provide support to the cities on financing. So, and this is the latest development. So, and indeed, the Capital Hub serves a central coordinating point in, well, this fragmented landscape of project preparation, of national platforms, technical system providers, and public and private financing. So it is now one of the main priorities. So now, as we are speaking also to PhD students and to academia, now I will dress my dress of professor, not as a mission board chair. And indeed, I will advocate for the need to have digital twins. So the digital twins basically are a representation of the city with spatial resolution and with time resolution, focused on with different focus and elements. For example, what we are doing is we are looking at the city and we see what type of buildings are there in a city. For example, normally buildings, so that's what we call archetypes. So there are buildings which are typical of the years 40 and then 50 and then 60 and then 70s and then 80s, whatever. So, and then we characterize all the different buildings. We characterize their construction materials, but then the computer reconstructs all the city. So that's where I've been working with MIT for the last 15 years. And I will show you, for example, here, this is an example of a Lisbon neighborhood. So this is what we may call a 2.5 dimensions. So what we do is we have the real buildings and then we draw the buildings as some boxes with exactly the same size as the buildings. And then what is very important to calculate energy needs is that they have the same wall to window to wall ratio as the real building. So I'm not very concerned if the window is exactly that window, but I'm very concerned if it is 20% of the building or so, because that's where the sun goes in. And then, of course, these models also take care of the shades from a building in the other, and they can calculate the energy needs for heating, for cooling, every hour of the day, because of course we know the climate, we know how the sun will move across all the days. And then this is very important because we can do the energy modeling in this sense And then we can see how much do we benefit, for example, if we insulate the walls, if we change the windows, if we change LED, and also, for example, if we install PV. And this is the basis for our digital twins. So they are very much building center. But as I will briefly show you, we are also looking at mobility, and I will show you some examples. So what are we doing with this? We look at, for example, here, I have a representation of the abatement cost curve. So what we do is we define a set of measures, for example, change the lights, insulate the building, change the windows, and then we calculate for each of the measures how much does it cost and how much CO2 it saves. So, and then it kind of provides a prioritization. For example, here this is cost, and there are measures that save money, and those should be the first ones. And then there are measures, well, you need to pay a little bit, but the area of each of these representations represents the amount of CO2 that it is annually saved. We are also looking at building retrofit in another way, which is try to make a building recyclable and reusable by design. So, and this is something in which we are very much focused. I've been working a lot in the past, for example, with the auto industry. As you may know, you cannot sell a car in any European country if you don't demonstrate that then the car could be recycled to 85% or 95%, including energy recovery. But for a building, which is the major producer of residues, construction demolition, you don't have any requirement. And this is very strange. So that's something that needs to be changed. And here what we are doing is to consider how the building's elements are connected together, how easily they can be disconnected. So then we automatically calculate when a building is designed in BIM, for a certain building, how much is the recycling potential, how much is the reusable potential, and how much materials you can take out of that. I think this is very important because this is really a tool for the circularity assessment in buildings by design when you do the design of the building. And then I just have here another, I'm conscious of time. So another example, which we call the mobility poverty index. So here what we do is we have the location of each building, and then we have defined an indicator which basically measures how far am I in each door of each building, for example, from a metro station, from a train station, from a bike station, from a bus stop. And then we have socioeconomic data to see, for example, how can, for example, those people that live in the building afford to have an electric car or so on. And then we make an indicator which has this into account. And for example, this is Lisbon, and you can clearly see that in these areas, this is excellent, but not so far away, this is very poor. And then this is the type of tool, if you have your models geo-referenced, and if you combine different layers of data from transportation infrastructure, from socioeconomic, from demographic, you can really produce a lot of innovative solutions to support the design of better solutions for the people. Of course, if you have in each building hour by hour potential consumption of energy, you can design what is now very much interesting, the energy communities, and for example, the impact of demand side flexibility. For example, if you switch on and off your equipment, how much can this impact, and how much, for example, this is something that here at MIT is very much discussed because in the US they have a very old electricity network, so they are very concerned with the increase of electricity consumption. In Europe, I think we are a little bit better. But anyway, with electrification, this puts a lot of stress in the grid, and then we should certainly have this type of tool to, at a local base, see what could be the impact of the electrification and the stress in the grid. And then, of course, to evaluate the potential for energy communities. So if we have buildings with different patterns of consumption of electricity. In this case, what I mean is different patterns of consumption during the hours of the day. For example, you have a school, you have a house, residential, whatever, and then you have some, for example, space for putting some solar PVs. So how can the match between hours of production of electricity and consumption be better equilibrated and in order to minimize the need, for example, of batteries? Well, I'll talk a little bit about this. And well, this is my last slide. So I really believe you have got this right. I was very impressed by this, so I couldn't be absent of this, even being here at MIT. Well, it's not only that it's 4 a.m., but I need to tell you that outside temperature should be minus 16 or something like that. So it's a terrible weather. I got a cold already. But of course, the aim of your doctoral network, which of course I went to study, being to advance new approaches for integrated planning of climate neutral cities through citizen engagement, as Aura you have just mentioned, and city governance decision-making support could not be better aligned and better contribute to this big purpose of having Europe leading by example and trying to design climate neutral cities. So I would like to congratulate you, wish you all the best. And of course, speaking by the mission, you can certainly count on us for anything. And thank you for your invitation and attention.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Professor Ferrao. It was really inspiring for all of us, for our doctoral researchers, but also for us to really see what are the ambitions of the Commission and of the city's mission, and also how are you advancing your research as an academic in MIT and with in Lisbon as well, like some of